This morning we are talking about how we, as followers of Jesus Christ, as Church of the Brethren, are called to invite others into obedience. And here's the big idea for this morning. God calls His people not just to live faithfully, but to invite others into the joy and the challenge of obedience, beginning with our own households, beginning with our children, and then extending into the nations. Church, today's word and words and scriptures that we read this morning invites us to wrestle with this holy calling to live obediently and invite others into that obedience in the same way. Jesus says in Matthew 5, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." Salt preserves. It flavors. It makes people thirsty. Light drives out darkness. What good is salt if it stays in the salt shaker? What good is light if it hides underneath a basket? This is Jesus' way of saying to us, your life is meant to invite others towards God. And then at the close of Matthew, we have this Matthew 28, the Great Commission, and it echoes this again. It says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to," what? "Obey everything that I have commanded you." Notice, not just information that we're supposed to be teaching, not just passing along nice ideas about God, but teaching obedience, calling people into a life of discipleship. We are called to invite others not just to believe, but to live differently in this world. In Genesis 12, as we have heard a number of times this morning, when God calls Abram, He doesn't say, I'm going to bless you so that you can have a nice, comfortable life. He says, I will bless you, and because of that, all peoples in all of the earth will be blessed through you. From the very beginning, God calls us to bless the world in belief of God. God calls us to be outward-facing, not inward-focused. Walter Brueggemann, who is one of my favorite theologians, he's an Old Testament theologian, he reminds us God's people must always live with, for, and among others in the world. That is not an optional extra. It is the very DNA of what our faith is all about. We do not withdraw to some sort of private holiness. We are to live our obedience in public so that others might taste and see that. John Howard Yoder, who is an Anabaptist theologian, once said, "The church is called to be now what the world is called to become ultimately." When we live as a community of blessing in the world, we give the world a glimpse of what God's future for us is. The Brethren motto, if you don't know it already, echoes this. It is a calling. It says, "For the glory of God and," what? Does anybody know? I mean, seriously, come on. Let's try that again. "For the glory of God and," very good, obedience, thank you much for that, "is not about ourselves." It is always aimed at our neighbor's blessing. Now, I don't tweet a whole lot, but it seemed easiest to put some things in tweetable form today, if you happen to tweet or on social media. And the reason that I sort of chose to do this, in particular for this message, is because we're outward facing. We're trying to share the joys that we have and the blessings that we have outwardly. And today, of course, a lot of that happens where? On social media. And so, I'm going to give you some tweetable tweets, some shareable socials today. If you happen to want to do that, if you want, you can take a picture with the tweetable tweet up there. Tweet it, or just ignore me while I do this. Tweetable tweet: God blesses us so that we can bless others. Faith was never meant to be what? Private property, right? All right. The early brethren understood this really, really deeply. Interestingly, in the book that we're following along, Let Our Joys Be Known, right at the very beginning of chapter 5, it says this: the early brethren were very evangelistic. They worked hard at inviting others to make the same choice for radical obedience that they were making at that time. Now, important to note, they weren't selling eternal fire insurance, okay? They were inviting neighbors into a whole new way of life that at that time was actually fairly dangerous to live into. One marked by simplicity, community, peace, and discipleship. Donald Dernbaugh, who is a Brethren scholar, has written a number of books about Brethren history, describes the Brethren movement in the 1700s as the forerunner for the Great Awakening among the American colonies. I didn't know that. Pretty incredible stuff here. That's how powerful this invitation of the early Church of the Brethren was. It sparked renewal that reshaped our entire continent. Merle Crows shows us how two main approaches were used. The first was home community missionary work, and the second was immigration or colonization. I don't really like that word because it's kind of dirty, but nonetheless, that's what she called it. Some stayed rooted in their towns, in their homes, invited friends and neighbors into a life that lived differently. And others, like I did when I went to Italy as a missionary, carried that message across seas and prairies. But both were saying the same thing. This life of obedience is too good for us not to share it with our friends and our families. Howard Thurman, who was a theologian and involved in the whole civil rights movement, he wrote this: "Don't ask what the world needs." Interesting. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. The brethren invited people into aliveness in Jesus Christ. A while ago, I'm not sure how many months ago, but certainly in the last year that I was here, I was asked to lead a study on the book For My Neighbor's Good. It was a study about this kind of thing, sharing our testimony on our life with Jesus Christ. And in that book, we're reminded that evangelism is not memorizing a scripture or winning arguments with people who disagree with us about God or Jesus Christ. It's about unlocking our personal testimonies and connecting them with our neighbors and our friends. Think of a championship basketball team. I'm not a real big fan of sports, as you know, but nonetheless, I still use sports analogies. So think about a basketball team, a champions basketball team, like the Golden State Warriors or Oklahoma City Thunder. My understanding is they won this year. Is that right? Yeah, some of you know that. Yeah. All right. I didn't until I started studying for this sermon. But nonetheless, they won, right? All right? Their success, however, as I looked at things, does not come from one star alone, but from disciplined teamwork, relentless practice, and players inviting each other into a shared rhythm. One selfish player who ignores the playbook weakens the whole team. And in the same way, evangelism is not a solo sport, right? We invite others into God's rhythm of obedience, and together we support one another and we shine brighter. So another tweetable tweet. Evangelism is not about selling religion. It's about inviting others into a way of radical obedience that transforms life. Psalm 78 that we read is clear. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. J. Clinton McMahon puts it beautifully. Psalm 78 invites us to share the good news and reminds us that our own children are an essential part of that start. We've experienced that this morning. We've focused on that, of supporting our children, not only as they live life here among us as a church family, but as they go out into the world and live their lives there. Obedience is learned mostly, not in church, actually, but at the dinner table, in bedtime prayers, in how we as parents and parentals treat our neighbors, and how we model forgiveness on a day-to-day basis. If we do not invite our children into obedience, we risk breaking the chain of our witness. Alan Kreider, again, a writer who I really appreciate in the Anabaptist Mennonite tradition, he reminds us that the spread of the church was not accomplished by dramatic events, but by ordinary believers, explaining their hope to their children, and while they were doing that, to their neighbors as well. Friends, evangelism begins at home. Again, from our neighbor's good, it challenges us. Build your testimony. Think about how your faith has made an impact in your life and what choices you've made because of how you follow Jesus. And then share that with others. This practice equips us to be authentic witnesses of the work of Jesus Christ in our lives. Many of us are in the agricultural business. Who hasn't seen the corn this year? Wow. Yeah, from what I understand, incredible. Not going to talk about corn, though. Barns. You need barns for corn. At least you used to, right? In Amish communities, and we all are aware of this, when a barn needs to be built, neighbors come together for that barn raising. No one does it alone. The invitation goes out, and then dozens show up for the event, each contributing their own strength, and by the end of the day, there is a barn that is built. Our testimony to obedience as a community builds on this theme. Teaching our children obedience is like a barn raising. It takes the whole family of faith, inviting the next generation into the building process. These children that we have blessed this morning, we need to remember that it takes a village to raise children, right? We all know that. And we need to commit to building their faith just as we commit to building ours. Evangelism starts at home, friends. If we don't invite our children into obedience, we risk silencing our witness for the future. Friends, when we obey Jesus Christ, especially when it costs us something, the world takes notice. Again, a sports theme. A team that plays with discipline and teamwork invites fans to join the movement as well. Not so many folks here, but it seems like it happens in other places. Or farming, when a field is well tended, like the corn that we're seeing right now, neighbors notice the fruit even if they have no idea how that corn was planted, how it's growing, or how it will be harvested. So too with faith. Matthew 5 says, "Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to our Father in heaven. The invitation isn't into just our words, but in the living testimony of our deeds on a day-to-day basis. Dorothy Day, I'm sure some of you are familiar with her. She once said, the best thing to do with the best things in life is to give them away. When we give away our lives in obedience, the light shines brightest. Again, one more quote from For Our Neighbor's Good. We often refer to the Great Commission as the Great Commission. But perhaps it is better if we understood it as our everyday commission. As you are going, wherever you happen to be living and playing, make disciples. And I encourage the children here, today, as you play on the playground or you stand at your locker or as you're learning in your classrooms, remember that as well as your everyday commission to shine forth the light of Jesus Christ in your daily lives. Has anybody ever seen the Black Panther, the movie The Black Panther? Not a real Brethren movie, I guess, with the whole pacifism thing, but nonetheless, some pretty cool stuff in there, some good things to remember. And in that movie, King T'Challa faces a question of whether or not Wakanda will remain hidden or whether they will open up their resources, bring those resources into the light and bless the world. And his decision to move their culture and their life into the light, to share what they have for the good of others, mirrors our calling as the Church of Jesus Christ. When we hide our light, the world stays in darkness. But when we live obediently and share what God has given us, nations are blessed. Last one. A life of obedience shines brighter than any sermon. Okay? I'm aware of that as well. Your lives are much more effective as you live them in the light out there than anything I happen to say up here on Sunday mornings. Our deeds invite others to glorify God. So, church, our calling is clear. God blesses us to bless others. Evangelism is an invitation to radical obedience. And we must begin with our children. And our obedience is the light that draws others to God. So, let us be bold. Let us live lives so salty, so luminous, so compelling that others cannot help but say, I want to live that way too. Amen.